When you picture a Prohibition-era gangster, your mind likely immediately jumps to the cinematic cliches: the rattling spray of a Tommy gun, the sharp silhouette of a pinstripe suit, and the brutal, cold-blooded turf wars that stained the streets of Chicago and New York red. But what if I told you that the most fascinating thing about these legendary outlaws wasn't the body count they racked up or the millions they laundered? Behind the steel-plated Cadillacs and the stone-cold glares, these men harbored habits that were utterly bizarre, shockingly dumb, and downright ridiculous. Today we are peeling back the fedoras and exposing the 10 strangest habits of history's most feared mobsters, proving that the untouchables were actually the ultimate drama queens of the underworld. Number 1. The 5-star prison suite. For the average person, a prison sentence is the ultimate nightmare, a cold, cramped cell and a diet of mystery meat. But for the kings of the criminal underworld, getting sent up wasn't a punishment. It was more like checking into a heavily fortified, all-inclusive luxury resort, where the guards functioned as your personal butler staff. Al Capone's stay at Eastern State Penitentiary is the stuff of legend, and arguably the birth of the glamour felon lifestyle. Capone didn't just survive in prison, he redecorated. His cell was converted into a high-end bachelor pad that would make a modern billionaire blush. We are talking about hand-buffed mahogany desks, plush oriental rugs that cost more than most people made in a decade, and a radio that was more expensive than the warden's own vehicle. While other inmates were eating slop, Capone was tucking into gourmet steak dinners delivered from the city's finest restaurants, smoking imported cigars, and sipping fine wine. He essentially ran his global criminal empire via a well-paid messenger service made up of prison guards who were more than happy to do his bidding for a fat envelope of cash. It was the ultimate power move. You aren't just above the law, you're literally renovating its waiting room and making the taxpayers pay for your slippers. Number 2. The passive-aggressive floral flex. Mobsters were the undisputed champions of petty behavior, and nothing highlighted this better than their habit of sending flowers to the funerals of people they had personally sent to the morgue. This wasn't about sympathy, it was about gangster trolling at the highest level. These floral arrangements weren't your standard grocery store bouquets. They were massive, over-the-top explosions of vegetation that shouted, "I'm sorry for your loss, but also, let's not forget who's still standing." One particularly spiteful gangster was known to send a 6-foot-tall arrangement shaped like a middle finger made entirely of white roses. Another legendary jerk sent orchids that spelled out the phrase, "he should have ducked." The sheer audacity of signing the cards was the icing on the cake. There was no mystery, no subtlety, and no shame. Imagine being the grieving widow and seeing a 10-foot floral horseshoe delivered by a guy in a trench coat, signed by the man who ordered the hit. It was a bizarre way of claiming credit for a crime while pretending to follow the social graces of the high society elite. In the mob, flowers weren't for mourning, they were for rubbing salt in the wound. Number 3. Corporate culture at the opera. Picture this: a group of men with nicknames like Knuckles, Frankie Two Times, and Jimmy the Weasel, men whose primary idea of culture is knowing which caliber of bullet makes the most satisfying exit wound, are forced to sit through a 3-hour Italian opera. This wasn't a comedy sketch, it was a mandatory corporate outing for many top-tier mob families. The big bosses, desperately insecure about their low-brow backgrounds and eager to be seen as sophisticated old-world gentlemen, made it a habit to drag their blood-soaked thugs to the opera to absorb some class. You can almost feel the tension in the room as these hardened killers, stuffed into itchy, custom-tailored tuxedos, fidgeted through La Boheme. They'd be sweating under the stage lights, trying to look deeply moved by a high C soprano, while secretly thinking about the rival they had to dispose of during the intermission. The bosses would whisper threats. You look fascinated by Puccini, or you're going to be the tragic ending to this show. It was a clumsy, painful, and utterly bizarre attempt at rebranding. They wanted to be the Medici family of the 20th century, but they were really just thugs in monkey suits who preferred a good tavern brawl to a libretto.
Number 5. The Fortune Teller's Boardroom. You would think that men who built multi-million-dollar empires on cold, hard logic and ruthless efficiency would trust their own gut instincts. You would be wrong. Prohibition-era gangsters had a staggering, almost childlike habit of outsourcing their most critical business decisions to psychics, astrologers, and fortune tellers. Forget hiring Wall Street analysts. These guys had Madame Olga on speed dial and wouldn't move a single crate of moonshine without checking the stars. It was a common sight to see a ruthless killer, a man who had survived a dozen gunfights, sitting in a dimly lit, incense-filled room, earnestly asking a woman with a crystal ball if the vibrations were right for a drive-by shooting. They'd ask if Mercury being in retrograde would mess up their profit margins on illegal gambling, or if a tarot card reading suggested they should invest in a new distillery. They wouldn't trust their own mothers with the location of their secret stash, but they'd bet their entire operation and their lives on the word of a woman who claimed to talk to ghosts. This level of paranoia proved that, despite their bravado, these men knew their lives were just one random, unlucky Tuesday away from a permanent dirt nap. Number 5. The monogrammed murder weapons. Gangster vanity was a force of nature. It wasn't enough to have silk shirts, gold pinky rings, and luxury watches. The real flex, the one that really showed you were the main character, was the habit of getting your initials put on everything. And we do mean everything. The most hold my beer moment of audacity was the trend of getting monogrammed guns. Ruthless hitmen would pay massive sums to have their initials elegantly carved into the pearl handles of the pistols they were going to use to commit federal felonies. It completely defeats the purpose of being a criminal. It's like a bank robber leaving a business card in the vault. But for the narcissistic mobster, it wasn't about being smart, it was about style. The message wasn't just, "You're dead." It was, "You've been terminated by a man of exquisite taste and extremely questionable judgment." They treated their firearms like designer handbags, flashy, overpriced accessories that were more about status than the actual work. If you were going to be whacked, the mob thought you should at least have the courtesy of seeing a well-placed AC on the handle before the lights went out. Number 6. The rolling panic room. A gangster's car wasn't just a vehicle for getting from point A to point B. It was a rolling fortress with a V8 engine. They had a habit of turning their Cadillacs and Lincolns into custom-built mobile panic rooms. This was the original Pimp My Ride, but with a high body count. We're talking about bulletproof glass so thick you could barely see through it, steel armor plates welded into the doors, and more secret compartments than a magician's tuxedo. These cars featured hidden slots for Thompson submachine guns, drop-down rear panels designed for shooting backward during a high-speed chase, and occasionally even oil slick dispensers to thwart the police. Al Capone's famous 1928 Cadillac was even painted the exact same shade of green as the Chicago police cars, equipped with a siren and a flashing light to add another layer of confusion and pure, unadulterated menace. It was the ultimate statement of defensive wealth. You can try to kill me, but I've already spent a fortune making it really, really inconvenient for you to succeed. Number 7. Al Capone's bizarre milk crusade. Al Capone, the man who essentially gave Chicago a PhD in murder, had a side hustle that sounds like a parody, but was 100% real. He was obsessed with milk safety. This king of crime became the most terrifying public health advocate in human history after a family member allegedly got sick from spoiled dairy. Capone took it personally and decided that if he was going to control the city's booze, he might as well control the breakfast table too. He bought his own dairy and used his usual mob tactics to crush all the competition, creating a milk monopoly built on threats. He famously persuaded the city council to mandate expiration dates on every milk bottle in Chicago. Can you imagine that meeting?
"Listen, Mr. Mayor, public health is very important to me. If you don't pass this law, your own health might expire." He was literally making kids orphans with his left hand while making sure their cereal milk was safe and full of calcium with his right. He was a walking, talking, murderous contradiction who used his enforcers to ensure that the city's toddlers had fresh cream. It's proof that even the most chaotic people in history have a line they won't cross, and for Capone, that line was sour milk. Number 8. The Taster's Dinner Table. Paranoia is a hell of a drug, and for a top-tier gangster, it extended right to the dinner table. The most powerful bosses, like Frank Costello, developed the truly bizarre habit of employing a personal food taster. This wasn't some medieval king in a castle. This was a guy from Brooklyn who made his money selling illegal gin, yet he was absolutely terrified that his spaghetti and meatballs might be his final meal. Before the boss would take a single bite of his ribeye or a sip of his Chianti, some poor low-level associate, the designated survivor of the kitchen, had to taste every single dish to make sure it wasn't laced with arsenic or hemlock. It is the ultimate sign of success in the underworld. You were so important that someone else has to risk explosive illness or instant death just so you can enjoy your dinner in peace. Trust was a luxury they simply couldn't afford, especially when it came to the lasagna. If the taster didn't keel over after 5 minutes, only then was it safe for the Don to pick up his fork. Number 9. The back-to-the-wall seating plan. Every successful gangster followed a rigid, non-negotiable habit regarding restaurant seating that every maitre d' in Chicago and New York knew by heart. Never, ever sit with your back to the door. This wasn't just a preference, it was a tactical necessity. Every self-respecting mobster had their spot in every local joint. It was always a corner table with a clear, panoramic view of the main entrance and their back pressed firmly against a solid, bulletproof adjacent wall. This way, they could see any potential threat, be it a rival hitman or a federal agent, the moment they stepped inside. Every single meal, from a quick espresso to a 7-course wedding feast, was treated like a military operation. If a host tried to seat a gangster at a center table or near a window, they were basically asking to have their restaurant shut down, or worse. The Wild Bill Hickok lesson of being shot from behind was something every mobster took to heart. If you couldn't see the door, you didn't eat. Number 10. The Identity Crisis. Plastic surgery gone wrong. When the heat got too high and your face was on every wanted poster from coast to coast, gangsters developed a gruesome habit of trying to change their appearance through back-alley medical procedures. This was the era before witness protection, so they took matters into their own hands, literally. The most famous example was bank robber John Dillinger, who paid a shady doctor to perform plastic surgery on his face and attempted to burn his own fingerprints off with acid. The results were usually horrifying. Dillinger ended up in agonizing pain with a lumpy, scarred face that made him look more suspicious, and his fingerprints remained perfectly identifiable despite the chemical burns. Other fugitives would try clumsy disguises like cheap wigs or fake mustaches, which often made them look like bad actors in a high school play. It was a desperate, vain, and often gruesome attempt to become invisible that almost always led directly to their capture. They were men of total overconfidence, believing that a little bit of acid and a sharp knife could outsmart the entire FBI. So there you have it. Behind the polished pinstripes and the smoke from the Tommy guns were men who were deeply superstitious, hilariously petty, and often totally absurd. Their lives were a dizzying mix of extreme violence and even more extreme weirdness, from milk crusades to monogrammed pistols. Now I have to ask you, which of these habits is the most shockingly ridiculous to you? And if you were a mob boss, what weird habit would you have? Would you be ranking cannolis or monogramming your getaway car? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the strangest corners of history.